Welcome. This is Something to Talk About from the Bainbridge Island Senior Community Center. We get together several times a week and talk about issues of importance or interest or anything in between. And I am grateful for Fieldstone Communities of Bainbridge Island for being a sponsor. They provide memory care and assisted living and independent living up on Rolling Bay, and they'd love to tell you a little bit about it. You can call them at 206-594-1010 or take a tour of their tranquil Rolling Bay campus. Look at the website, fieldstonecommunities.com, or come by for a tour. Also, I'd like to acknowledge that this, where we live and work and play, is the ancestral homeland of the Suquamish people, the people of the clear salt water, who have lived here since time immemorial. We honor them, and we are learning from their stewardship of these lands and waters. Today, Drury is with us, and this multi-faceted Renaissance guy is working on trying to promote a concept that is a national concept in a bunch of different communities called documenters.org. Hi, Rob.
Hi, Reed. How are you doing today from your getaway to the North Cascades?
I'm actually right here, but I did have a nice trip to the North Cascades last weekend, and now I'm here for a lovely weekend here on Bainbridge Island.
It looks like it will be a nice one. Well, I wanted to thank you for having the opportunity to talk about documenters because I think we're at a place in our cultural history where many people are wondering, like, is there something that I can do about perceived issues that worry them, but they don't know exactly what, if anything, they can do. And it sounds like a lot of the traditional avenues are not too open. Documenters has developed as a national movement based on the idea that they want to encourage people to be able to be involved in their communities actively.
So I'm putting up a screen of documenters.org, a network of newsrooms and community organizations who are interested in participatory civic media. So we have, even here on Bainbridge Island, we do have a paper with a local name, Bainbridge Review, that's been here for an awful long time. But just in the news last couple weeks, the publisher, which is Black Publishing in Canada, has now been sold to a holding company, and so that one never knows what's going to happen with commercial media these days when the holding companies take over. And so I think that this idea of having local folks cover local events for local folks is an interesting one.
I think it's interesting, and also there's a good amount of evidence that it's very productive in terms of helping people feel more active and have some agency in their life. They've done studies of the people that have been trained as documenters, and it turns out that almost all of them say that they feel like they've not only learned more, but actually been involved in their community in effective ways much more. They generally tend to learn about things that they would not have known about. And one of the things that impresses me is that the training for a documenter actually helps you become a journalist, more or less. You learn what objective reporting is versus just sort of taking a position that you then want to defend. And so I think this kind of idea could really be helpful, especially for people who have an interest and some time to devote to that. One of the things that I've looked into is journalism students at the high school here. It turns out that there may be a group of students who would like to be involved, but they don't have any venue right now. They used to have a school newspaper at Bainbridge High School, and that program has been discontinued for various reasons. So the person who was their mentor is looking around to see, well, where are some of the people that were involved, and would they like to get more training as a journalist? And also, by the way, in your graphic you pulled up, there's another interesting word there, get paid. People get paid to do this through a sponsorship process, and I think that's a marvelous idea. One of the things, though, that made it important, from my view, was that we unfortunately found out that of the cities that have documented, I think we've got another person speaking here somewhere.
I think it's just you and me, maybe somebody in the background in my office. But you
Okay.
can see there are a number of locations: Akron, Bismarck, Indianapolis, New Brunswick, Chicago, places that people have set up documenters, and they have information about news and upcoming meetings that people might attend. You're hoping that we might be able to maybe do something like that here, right?
Well, yes, it's amazing given the rep that we have, but Seattle does not have an organization, much less Bainbridge. So I think we have an opportunity there to do something that's productive and would be sort of a step in the right direction. Maybe also could, you know, catalyze some interest in Seattle as well. But I think it's got a lot of promise because they have training packages that they've put together and access to training seminars. One of the things, though, that also really struck me as very important, Reed, is when you mentioned, well, maybe this idea could somehow be integrated with the mission of the senior center, because people that are members of the senior center may, I know several for real, that do have an interest in being involved in their community and wanting to do
For
something.
real. Yes, I'm sure. I think that the combination, what you were talking about earlier about intergenerational response to the idea of collecting information about meetings and activities would be of interest to folks, I hope. We need to see whether we can get a critical mass. One of the things that you were telling me earlier is that the documenters.org requires some sort of organization or entity that is willing to sponsor and be the sort of fiscal sponsor of the program. And it intrigued me that maybe that was some way that the senior community center might be able to help once we have a sense that we have enough people who could make it go of it.
Absolutely. Yeah, I think that would be terrific. That's the level of sponsorship that they find most important, although I think it's also interesting that the editor of the Kitsap Sun is interested in this project and wants to act as sort of a consultant to the process. He's, of course, aware of the thing you mentioned already, which is how local newspapers are under, more and more pressure to either reduce their scope or end their practice entirely. And it's absolutely tragic that the Bainbridge paper should come under any pressure to change its operations in a negative direction, since they were the only paper in the U.S. that spoke out about the Japanese internment. I'm not sure all people on Bainbridge are aware of that, but it's a real distinction that at that time, every other paper that took a position was in favor of interning Japanese citizens or Japanese heritage U.S. citizens. And to have that paper threatened, of course, would be very, very disturbing. Go ahead, Marcy.
Philip wanted to comment.
It's just me.
Yeah, hi, just you.
Just me.
Just you. It says Marcy, but that might be just you.
It's just me with Ken. I'm just Ken. I mean, I'm just Sheila. Whatever. That's interesting because Rob, because you mentioned that about the information that came down with the Bainbridge Review during the exclusion time, that there was a fellow from a high school student who was part of the evacuees who was hired by Walt and Willie and the Woodwards, and to send back information, a documenter from the different camps that they were at Manzanar and then out at the other one, and send out who got married and who had babies and who won the ball game and all of that kind of stuff. And I had the honor of typing some of that information up because we had to resurrect the information that was in the Bainbridge Review during the wartime, and the ink was so bad that it was starting to fail completely. So many of us on the island typed away like crazy and typed everything that came out into the like even from Safeway or whatever things that they were selling for potatoes and stuff. But it was the young fellow that who did it through the entire time, and it was remarkable. I remember seeing his report that I typed. It was really good.
Yeah.
Paul Otaki.
Paul Otaki, thank you. I keep forgetting his name. Should
What a
remember it.
great story, and what an example of how something that obviously is very valuable can get replicated in a more systematic way too. I mean, I think that that story of Paul is something that would ideally be included in all the training for documenters, certainly documenters in Bainbridge. But I think in general, that's a great story of how someone can want to look into what's going on and then pass it on to others who care about it. And I think that's a wonderful example of what the documenters could do in many places. They have done that in some places, but unfortunately, we just don't have anything yet going on here. Well, I guess I would be curious, Reed, what your thoughts are about surveying the membership of the senior center. I know that I'm going to be
I'm wondering if are you proving to be the conduit and kind of coordinator at this point of trying to see who might be interested?
I am so far, but I think it's potentially a big job, and I've got a number of things going on that make me concerned that it could easily outstrip my abilities if we don't find a number of people that might be interested in this. One of the things that's coming up, though, that I think is some good candidates is a class I'm going to be teaching down at the senior center in a month or two. People that have an ideal level of curiosity about their world and their place in it. You probably recall the first go round of Big History, and apparently there's a dozen or so.
Good. Oh, good. I'm glad you're talking about that because I want to know a little bit more. I've got it on my schedule, but tell us more about that.
So it's April the 6th and the 13th and the 20th. There are about a dozen people who signed up. I think we can probably take a few more. And they'll be meeting 3 Saturdays as Rob goes through this. I think that's right, 3 Saturdays as Rob goes through the concept of stepping back and looking at history, not just in the close-up, but the big picture of what's going on.
Exactly.
What time is that's going to happen?
It is from noon to 1 on those Saturdays, and you need to sign up with the center in advance. Call the center at 206-842-1616 or send an email to info@biseniorcenter.org. As I said, we just have a few spaces left at this point, so you'll have a good group, Rob. And then I think maybe after that, we might want to schedule a meeting that you might be willing to convene to see who might show up that would be interested in learning about and perhaps participating in a documenter's program. And ideally, it would be a time and date when the editor from the Kitsap Sun and maybe your friend in the high school faculty might be willing to be present as well, and ideally some students.
Yes, exactly. No, that's what I'm hoping. And it turns out that the two things with documenters and Big History are sort of interconnected, in that the idea behind Big History is not that it's an academic pursuit, but it's something that's sort of allows people to be action oriented and to actually learn from history way back, not just what happened yesterday, in the most recent election or whatever, but also just taking the big picture of history and what lessons there are for us there. But knowing that and passing it on is an important part. I'll be glad to do that. I'm not sure how that will work, but I'm quite interested in doing it. No, the reason that I was fascinated, Reed, is that I was hoping that your organization might be able to function as a sponsor, because I know as an individual, I'm not able to do that. They want certain things that have to do with being an organization that exists in some structure, civic or governmental structure, which I believe you do, right?
Well, we are a registered 501c3, which is a nonprofit, and I think that it's certainly within our purview we can't lobby, but this is exactly the opposite of that. This is an effort to try to develop a network of nonpartisan, as you say, objective reporting and information sharing, which sounds rather quaint in our current media landscape. Would you mind if we shared your email if somebody is watching this and wants to send you a note?
No, that would be great. I'd appreciate it. The email is straightforward. It's rl.drury, my last name, at gmail.com. And anyone that's interested in any way in this idea, I'd be glad to receive an email and discuss it in more detail, how to sort of build support and make some of the steps necessary to bring this into existence. To get the training, you have to meet certain criteria. And I think, Reed, you're sort of hitting on some of that you have to have a certain number of people. And then also you have to have some type of involvement in the community through some kind of institutional connections. And I think, Dave, the publisher of the Kitsap Sun, also the valuable person to have input on that process. So it's definitely a great interest, and I'd be glad to get any questions or statements of interest that people might have. But I do think that the thing you mentioned, by the way, Reed, that site, documenters.org, is worth taking a look at, because it gives you an idea of some of the projects that have been undertaken and some of the resources that they have developed across the US. And it is interesting that really a city as large as Seattle hasn't gotten involved, since a number of much smaller cities have been able to do that. And of course, Bainbridge has a reputation of wanting to step forward, so I think it's a good possibility there too.
And I do think that one of the things that is challenging about this is that the economies of scale for these corporate news gatherers covering various meetings and activities doesn't make sense. Whereas from the point of view of a concerned citizen, it makes all the sense in the world to know what's going on by our elected officials in meetings.
Exactly. That's why I think it would serve a personal purpose as well as sort of being an institution. It would be helpful for lots of people who have an interest and want to know, like, well, what can I do that might be of some value? And it turns out that the website there for documenters has case studies that show how it can be valuable and affect change at various levels, but mostly focused on local issues. Of course, a person that gets a feel for local issues then may find that they want to have some involvement in other levels too. So I think it's a very intriguing and productive idea.
Just about local issues, it seems as though one of the challenges in our society right now is that there is so much attention focused on national politics and national division, and there's hardly any coverage or awareness of local politics, and what would be maybe a more likely area for comity, for unity, which is what we want our neighborhood to be. And so it's a hole right now because it doesn't make the kind of economic sense that it did when we were growing up. The internet did the same thing to the news industry as it did to the music industry, and the news industry is still reeling.
Well, I think one of the things that's interesting, my background in neuroscience is involved here in some studies they've done of how the situation you mentioned at the national level is influenced a lot by social media, which thrives on creating division and creating emotional arousal and upset, and the appearance that there's differences, radical differences, whereas local interactions of people face to face tend to come up with much more commonality, as you say, much more, we're all people, versus that artificial separation that the media has created. So this project could involve that as well, of actually just meeting people who live in your community and finding out that they don't think things that are radically different than you in a lot of ways.
Well, I'm going to ask people to stay tuned. The big history discussion coming up in April, and then anytime, send Rob a note, rl.drury@gmail.com. And we'll start to gather string on this. And do let us know when you start to feel like you have a critical mass, Rob, and we will be glad to host a meeting here of folks who would be interested in organizing a Documenters chapter, or at least exploring that.
Absolutely, I appreciate that. And keep in mind that Margaret Mead said that, a small group of committed people is really the only way that you ever get anything done. So I don't think we have to have hundreds or thousands of people. We just have a group of people that want to try to do something creative and productive. And this is something that's been shown to go in that direction. So thank you for the chance to briefly sketch what Documenters might be.
And thank you for, although you're a busy guy, taking taking the front to move this forward. And it isn't something that you can do by yourself, but it's something that you can help inspire others to do together.
Thank you so much, Rita. Appreciate the compliment, and we'll keep moving in that direction together.